All right, let's start this off with a Christian positive affirmation. I will live this day surrendered to God, rather than trying to control people, time, and circumstances. Hello, everybody, today. So this is a channel called Christian RPG Gamers. So today I want to talk a little bit about the franchise called Final Fantasy. And I just want to give some of my thoughts about it, and I'll try to throw some kind of a Christian perspective on it too. All right, so let's start this out by watching some kind of like a video or something. It happens to be raining outside a little bit, so you might hear some little raindrops or something, right? Okay, so I'm gonna watch a little bit of one of these trailers or something here. So yeah, like I'll give some of my thoughts about it. Maybe we'll start it out by watching a little video, kind of set the mood a little bit. I just want to say also, if fair use is a thing, right? All right, so let's try watching it for a little while.
Scene.
Okay, so I have no idea whether that trailer is going to get copyrighted or not. So if it's not in there or is muted, you know why, right? Okay. So, definitely that was a really cool trailer. It started out pretty slow, but it got pretty good later on. So, that's the thing, right? Okay. So yeah, I think I'm gonna make this video. I think that probably the name of the type of video I'm gonna call is more like a kind of like more more objective, neutral disposition towards Final Fantasy in general, or something like that maybe. So yeah, I was thinking about I might at some point I might make a walkthrough, kind of like a game movie walkthrough of Final Fantasy 16. I don't think I have any walkthroughs of Final Fantasy on my channel as of right now that I can think of. I don't think I do, no. So this one I'm not super familiar with the game. I mean, I've only played it a little bit. I've gotten maybe like 20 minutes after kind of like when the demo would end. So I'm like maybe 2 hours or something into the game. So I mean, obviously I'm not that far. I don't know that much about the game, but I've been kind of like getting back myself back. I've been kind of like re-going through Final Fantasy. Okay, so I'll list some history. I don't want to make this all about myself, right? But you gotta be honest too, right? I haven't played that many Final Fantasy games. I've kind of like dabbled here and there with some of the older Final Fantasies. I was never that interested in them, but they were cool. I was kind of young, and I didn't really understand what I was doing. And I guess fast forward like a very long time, I guess probably from then, I played Final Fantasy 15. I think I borrowed it from somebody. Honestly, I did like it quite a bit. I did. I mean, it was honestly a pretty fun game. And then I think I watched a video about Final Fantasy VII remake. And honestly, again, I really like the new style of the Final Fantasy. Now I know that might be controversial to some people, but maybe because I'm not familiar with the old stuff. I wasn't really around, and I didn't really play a lot of the old Final Fantasy very much. I really only have experienced and enjoyed like the new Final Fantasy stuff. So I played Final Fantasy 15. I think I watched a video about the Final Fantasy 14 online. I also did play. I played the 14 online for a little bit. I didn't put that much time into it, but at least I understand the basics of it. It's a pretty cool series. I mean, I do like MMOs in a lot of ways. There isn't that many like super really great MMOs anymore. There's a handful of them. I'm trying to think what other Final Fantasies I've really played or experienced. Oh yeah. The one of the old games that I played is I think this one most people are familiar with. There was Final Fantasy X. I think it's what's called. The guy with they had like Titus and I think in Luna. Yeah, that game. That game I really like that game. I think that's one of the old Final Fantasies that I originally experienced. So then there's that one. Yeah, and to be honest, I really haven't done that much more Final Fantasy other than that. So, I mean, I play a couple. I've kind of seen, played, or experienced some of the newer ones, and I really have very little experience with the old ones. So, I mean, granted, I'm not coming from a place when I make this video series, or I'm talking about Final Fantasy, that I'm like an expert on this, right? Because I'm not. But I honestly I had a pretty good time with Final Fantasy 15. I think I played that on the PlayStation 4. Yeah, I mean that game definitely shaped my disposition towards Final Fantasy. I would say pretty positively. I mean, overall the gameplay was fun. So the obvious part is that it looks really freaking pretty. Like the new Final Fantasy games, they are really gorgeous looking. They have great music, great sound effects. They play pretty smoothly. I mean, I guess like one criticism, is this isn't linked to like Final Fantasy, granted. This is really just about most newer stuff. Is the combat sometimes it feels like it's like button mashing, like you just press buttons constantly, and enemies have insanely high like health bars. It just kind of feels tedious sometimes. Like the combat, it's not combat in a lot of newer games. It's okay, right? It's not the worst, but certainly it could be better. I feel like in a lot of ways. But that's not really specific to Final Fantasy, granted, right? But again, like, the graphics look nice. They have great voices. Lots of music. Even from that little trailer, they have some really they make everything feel super epic, right? I think that's one thing I have a lot of respect for Final Fantasy about, is that everything is super epic. It's like super legendary and epic. You have these big boss fights. Everything is to like the maximum scale. And again, like, as a Christian, right? Obviously, I want to put some kind of a Christian spin on this in some way, shape, or form too. So I guess one aspect, obviously the name is called, Final Fantasy, right? The name fantasy in it. Obviously, there's lots of stuff that's not based off of reality, and most Final Fantasy, to be honest, it's pretty in the higher spectrum of fantasy rather than the lower. I mean, some of the Final Fantasy is grounded in pretty rooted reality like ours, but sometimes it's not also. I mean, I can understand, and I have a level of respect for a franchise that's like so off the rails that it's not hinged in any way, shape, or form of our reality. And I can respect that in a lot of ways too. Sometimes I appreciate like things being separate from each other. Like, we live on Earth, and there's a different reality. It's fantasy. It's not reality, right? And like, it helps to separate yourself from the content you're experiencing. I think that can be a net good, right? So yeah, I guess, like, again, like, from what I've heard, just about every Final Fantasy series, or like, every Final Fantasy is pretty much its own little world. It's not most of the franchise is not linked to any other franchise, really. So like Final Fantasy X is not linked to Final Fantasy, like, Final Fantasy 15. There's really no direct references. And none of the games are really linked in any way, shape, or form to any of the other games in any way. So like, they might have similarities occasionally, but there might be a character that hypothetically might exist in one world in the Final Fantasy that might exist in another, but it's like, it's not frequent, right? It's not going to matter that much, because they're all standalones, which is something I also can respect, right? Like, if I wanted to play, the new Final Fantasy 16, which, I have my PlayStation 5 right now. I'm borrowing it from a friend. I mean, granted, I also could have just bought it too. It's not a big deal either way. I mean, I own a bunch of games. But say I wanted to play Final Fantasy 16. I don't need to know the past like 27 Final Fantasy series and all their spin-offs and everything in order to play the new game. I can just play the new game. Now, granted, there are some things that are similar between all the Final Fantasies from what I can tell. So, like, they like chocobos, right? They have a little picture here. I don't know what picture I'm gonna find here. They have those little birds that have different and sometimes they can have like different colors. And there are similarities between all the Final Fantasy series. Again, like, oops, I did not mean to save that image. But they are, like, the stories themselves and the main characters and the plot and the setting and stuff, most of them are their own story. So, I mean, I think it is valuable to at least partially know some of the aspects of each game. I mean, if you know past games, the newest game that comes out, it's probably going to make more sense to you, and you don't have to think about it too much, right? So, I mean, a little bit of some basic references would probably be valuable, but for the most part, they're pretty much like standalone games. Honestly, like most franchises these days, almost everything they make is standalone. But that's not necessarily always true either. Okay, so So what else can I talk about when it comes to Final Fantasy? Yeah, like I've been more open-minded, more willing to try it again. I mean, I also don't think it's very fair of me to judge something. Like like what's the old saying, right? Never judge a book by its cover. I mean, I feel like you should at least, if you're gonna judge something or judge someone, at least from a human perspective, right? And in holiness, God is perfect. He knows everything. He resides in heaven, and we reside on earth. But as a human being, we should not judge something or judge someone, at least until we learn. We should at least learn a little bit more about it, or about who they are, or what it is, right? So it's like, I'm not super familiar with the Final Fantasy franchise, so I mean, I shouldn't just pass massive amounts of like condemnation upon the entire franchise, without at least knowing, in some sense, without at least knowing some more of the basics of it, and like learn. And maybe before you judge something or judge someone, you should at least learn a little bit more about them, right? I feel like if you at least learn some more about something, and you can learn some of the positives and negatives, then I feel like you at least have more clarity, and you're more objective. And I think you would have more of the right to judge something if you at least had some kind of understanding. Again, I'm only familiar with like maybe 2 or 3 of the games. I mean, I played Final Fantasy X. I think I played Final Fantasy 15. I watched a game movie basically on, I think, 7 remake, and I watched it on like I think it's called A Realm Reborn. So I played like a couple hours from like 7 or 8 of the other ones. I don't even remember half their names. So yeah, like I feel like before you before you judge too heavily, at least learn a little bit about it. That's also, I think, a good aspect for myself, right? Okay. So yeah, like I think I might have interest in making a walkthrough of a Final Fantasy 16. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But I don't know. I mean, if I do make it, I don't know how much commentary I'll make for it. To be honest with you, I mean, I also don't really know if I expected to get a lot of views or anything. Sometimes those kind of things, they are what they are at the end of the day. I've heard a lot. I mean, there's a pretty mixed reception, a pretty mixed disposition about the series in general. I know that in Final Fantasy X, it talks about the idea of the idea of sin, and I know I've watched a video somewhere on YouTube, about Final Fantasy, about they have the idea of the quote unquote gods, right, and a man's hubris. And in Final Fantasy, it also is a great example of mankind being humbled because of their egos, and they don't acknowledge, basically in holiness, I worship God. I believe God is God, and there's no other God but God. And then they call them the quote unquote gods or something. I mean, I don't know, that stuff is kind of shady, but it kind of represents God and Himself in heaven. And how people have big hubris, and they think they know more than the Creator Himself, or whoever they put in or whoever they put to be God in their world. Usually that being humbles, they humbles the main villain of the story. The villain usually has a huge ego and thinks of himself as like a deity, and he thinks he can do and say whatever he wants. And in the end, a lot of times, you come kind of crashing down from heaven back down. And you learn your place. I think that is probably a pretty strong teaching within Final Fantasy that I can tell. Is that mortal men and women, we need to learn our place in life. That we aren't very much in this life. And that one day we are going to die. And that in ways that we are nothing. I do think this is a pretty strong biblical foundational truth that human beings, we're here one day and then we're gone the next. Same with myself, the same with us all, right? I do think that's a pretty strong moral biblical teaching from Final Fantasy. The idea of mortals versus like the Almighty God of Heaven, and how we need to be careful with our hubris and have a little humility. I also feel like that's probably a pretty strong general message, to be honest. Probably throughout just about all of fantasy in general. Fantasy teaches human beings that we aren't really as important as we like to think of ourselves as being. We are loved and we have value, but we got to keep our egos in check. Okay, so I think that's one big strong message I would say about Final Fantasy, especially more from like a Christian perspective, right? And honestly, I do think that if the Final Fantasy 16, if I make that walkthrough on the channel, I think that's one aspect I would like to talk about. I don't know how much commentary I want to write on it though. So it's like, I mean, I should write at least some, but I think I'm going to limit it a little bit too. But especially for more like a linear game, right? Like, I don't have any control over the game. I don't have any control over the characters in the story. So again, like, even like, a poetic, ironic justice, right? Like, I should keep my own ego in check and be a little more humble too. I can give some thoughts about what I see or hear, and in holiness, I can glorify God with it, or people can enjoy it. But I got to keep my ego in check too, right? Yeah, we'll see. If I do make this Final Fantasy 16, maybe at some point in the future, I'll make another Final Fantasy video walkthrough series too. But we'll see what happens if God is willing, right? In heaven. I wouldn't mind going through and playing maybe Final Fantasy 7. And then there's I think it's like a Final Fantasy 7. I think it's called like a Rebirth. It's a new one that came out like a couple months ago. I'm not really familiar at all with that story. Again, like there's a whole bunch of stories out there. I wouldn't mind going through maybe some of the newer versions of them for the channel. But, I guess we got to start small and start somewhere, right? So maybe I'll start with Final Fantasy 16. And then maybe we'll work out, or maybe just maybe, depending on what happens, we'll work our way out from there. So yeah, like, I'm interested in giving it a shake. I'm not super familiar with the franchise, and I'm not really an expert on this stuff. And obviously there is a lot of really sketchy, morally gray, like bad stuff that exists in it too. But there's also the argument that you can you can set yourself aside and just enjoy content without having to like. Was it like even that affirmation, right? Where did I find that from? What is affirmation? I decided to try an affirmation today. I will live this day surrendered to God, rather than trying to control people, time, and circumstances. Yeah, like, just the whole idea of, I think the whole idea that, like, we don't have to control the universe, that doesn't make what a person does necessarily morally right. It doesn't necessarily mean that what we do is necessarily morally right when we enjoy something. But there's also this sense of truth. There is a truth in the universe, right? That we either do not, have not, or cannot control every single thing in the universe. And I do feel like there is a level of truth to this. That sometimes you can learn to just disassociate and detach yourself from something. And you can just experience it for the sake of experiencing it. And, there could be good in it, there could be evil in it. It's like, this doesn't mean it's not your fault, right? Like, there's a sorcerer in the series, right? Like, obviously as a Christian, we know that, like, practicing, like, black magic necromancy is satanic. That's an evil thing. Sorcery in general is bad. We're not supposed to mess around with this stuff, right? But you want to watch a video about it, about some cool, like, a cool fantasy adventure. It's not the end of the world. Like, it's like watching, like, like Lord of the Rings or like Star Wars or something, right? it's like, yeah, you're not that character necessarily. Like, it's cool to kind of role play yourself as the character, put yourself in their shoes. But like, there's also a healthy level of like disassociation, detachment from the, from the, from the characters in the story, from yourself. Like, like you live in this specific reality, in holiness. God is in heaven and you're in earth, and all this other stuff is in the fantasy world. I mean, I'm not saying that makes it right either. It could be morally wrong. But I do think there is like detaching yourself from something so you can enjoy it, right? Like, I think I made a video at some point like a couple weeks ago or something. Just like, the whole idea of like, again, like there's lots of storytelling, right? Again, like, you don't even necessarily have to agree with it. And then, to be honest, there's also tons of stuff I think you could find in a series where you do agree with it too. And there's a lot of fun. You can get a lot of enjoyment, a lot of satisfaction from it. There's great storytelling, there's great characters. And there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of like, positive, upbeat, upright moments in it. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of bad crap too. I think a lot of things about like, especially a lot of these more like linear stories where you got like, you call them like the JRPG style games, or just like the content in general. They're just great storytelling. At the end of the day, I mean, and it's hard to keep track of everything in it and all the stuff in it. I do feel like it's okay sometimes, maybe, to be honest, like a good Christian message is it's okay to take your hands off the control. Like, maybe you don't have to control everything. Yeah, I think there is a level of healthiness to not trying to control everyone and everything in the universe. Yeah, like even coming back to the idea of hubris, right? Again, like, God is God, and no, we're not God, and we can't control the fact that these were created. The people made these stories, and you didn't make these stories, right? And I also think it's completely okay to just choose not to watch it at the same time. Again, but this level of, again, you're not responsible for what other people make and what other people do in their lives. You're responsible for your own life, and they're responsible for theirs. And you didn't make this stuff. I mean, if you want to watch it, that's one thing. Again, but you're not the one creating this stuff, and you're not the one really profiting from it either. It's like the same thing with like, like Harry Potter, right? Again, like, I didn't create Harry Potter. I didn't get like $1 billion paycheck from it, and I'm not getting the praise and the fame and all the stuff from it. And I'm not the one that created the IP and built the characters and stuff. I didn't force sorcery into it. I'm not saying it's necessarily like a super morally. It's not morally like virtuous necessarily. I mean, you should just go out and watch it either, right? But I do think that there is a level of fair and justness in the universe to also accept and understand the fact that I didn't make this stuff either. I can enjoy something, or even I can go on YouTube and I can make a little YouTube walkthrough about it, but I didn't build this IP, right? I can just enjoy something for the sake of enjoying it and just detach myself from it. And I do think there is a layer of truth to this. That when it comes to fantasy, or really just any content, like, you can just enjoy it if you want to enjoy it. I mean, they're humanoid like looking people and creatures and people and things, with stories and characters and plots. If you just want to watch the characters interact with each other or whatever, maybe you can choose to find something of value hypothetically from it, or maybe there isn't anything of value in it either. But again, I do feel like at the end of the day, it is a choice, and there can be value from it too, right? Okay. So maybe that was some of my little spiel about it, right? Okay, but again, like, I just wanted to say, again, like, one other thing I want, again, like, I know I said this earlier, right? I'll go back to a little more to it. I don't want to make this too much longer, but again, like, I'm not that familiar with Final Fantasy either. So, I mean, I don't want to just judge something super heavily, without having that like without having a deeper level of understanding to it either. But I do think it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of cool stuff out there, right? And maybe there is value to also not knowing everything about it either. It's like, I mean, I'm not familiar with all the old stuff, so I just come in with a new, fresh perspective, and maybe that's not a bad thing either, right? Sometimes an old perspective can be kind of like, detrimental towards your enjoyment, because I don't really have a lot of expectations for it. So I mean, to me, it's a little bit different than somebody who's been playing Final Fantasy for like, you've been playing the game for like 20 years or something, and I played a couple games, a small amount, and I played like 2 or 3 of the games, right? So I'm coming in from a very new point of view, and other people are coming in from like a very old point of view. So yeah, like, okay. Yeah, I mean, so again, like, just kind of, these are just some of my initial thoughts about the franchise, right? I do think it's very cool. To be honest, it does look really nice, at least on the outside, right? Obviously, sometimes the phrase is, it's what's on the inside that counts, not on the outside. But it still does look really nice, right? Like, it's really pretty looking franchise. They look nice. They have great voice acting. There's a lot of good things about it that I think that exists within them too. But you still got to keep your wits about you. Okay, so those are just, I guess, some of my initial thoughts about Final Fantasy. Yeah, I might be interested in taking more of a look at it again. I might make a handful of some videos about Final Fantasy. I might eventually, if God is willing, I might make a walkthrough of one of these games. I might do it on Final Fantasy 16, and we'll see what happens, right? But yeah. Oh yeah, like, and also kind of like what I usually like to say in a lot of my videos. Again, like, I'm not the moral authority in the universe. Like, in holiness, God is the moral authority of all things. I'm not. So, again, like, if you want to watch it, or you want to play it, or you want to talk about it, or whatever you want to do with this franchise, right? My general disposition is as between God and you and God. And, like, at the end of the day, you're going to have to come to terms and peace with it, and you're going to have to reap what you sow. And the same is true with myself. So again, like, I'm not going to tell you that you're allowed to watch this franchise. But I'm also not going to tell you you're not either. I mean, I kind of, again, my general philosophy, which does not have to be yours, by the way. It's just my philosophy, right? Is I generally have a pretty neutral. My general philosophy is I have a very neutral disposition towards pretty much all entertainment in general. And that pretty much all entertainment has good and it has evil within it, and you can choose to find whatever you want to find from it. More often than not, it's pretty secular made too. But who's to say, right? In holiness, God Himself, His hand could be at work. He could be the one who inspired to put these thoughts in people's minds or whatever, and he could have been the one who created and built these things. I mean, I literally don't know. I believe He's good. I have no idea, right? But again, that's my philosophy, though, is that I have a very neutral disposition pretty much towards all entertainment. So, I mean, you think whatever you want at the end of the day, right? Okay. What do I have like this? So, again, like, putting a positive affirmation, and I think it's good to put some affirmations in your life sometimes, right? It's like, the thoughts that you think of all day, we can just consume ourselves in extreme negativity, or we can at least try to think of something more positive. Positivity is extremely difficult to do. Again, I might add one of these in every once in a while. It's good to tell yourself something good, right? It's good to focus on something more upbeat. I'll read this one more time. I'm probably gonna end this here. All right. So I found this one. I'm only 7 out of like 30 of them in this whoever this person is. But I found this one and I really liked it, so I'll read it one more time. I will live this day surrendered to God, rather than trying to control people, time, and circumstances. There's a Bible verse from Galatians 2, verse 20 from the NIV. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay, so yeah. And I think that's a really healthy mindset too, right? You cannot control other people's lives. You can't control time. You can't control the circumstances. Put your faith in God, surrender your will to his will. And just try to live your day, focusing on God rather than all this other stuff. And you can't control it either way. But you can put your faith in the Lord, and he can control those things, right? All right, so yeah, I'll give some final thoughts on this, or Final Fantasy. And yeah, again, I do think it's a cool franchise. Again, as from a Christian point of view, I guess it has sorcery in it and stuff, but it also, to be honest, it has a lot of realistic stuff in it too. In Final Fantasy 15, they have a car. They have I think in Final Fantasy 7 they have a motorcycle. And again, they have a lot of realistic stuff in it too. And it has a lot of stuff that's, unhinged from reality. It has a lot of different stuff in it. That's why I generally view it as more neutral. I guess this rain's starting to come down still. And yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. And I think there's a lot of great adventures to go through. And I wouldn't mind, on the channel making a walkthrough of Final Fantasy. Because I do think entertainment's a valuable thing in our lives. Obviously, it's not the only thing in our lives either. And yeah, I also look at the point of view. Oh yeah, I don't want to make this video too much longer. I'll try to end this here soon. So again, and there's another aspect, I guess, when coming to something like this, right? It's I think I talked about this in a different video, but it's one of God's holy 10 commandments. Thou shalt not covet. The idea of looking at other people's lives and viewing your own life from how successful they are or what you should or shouldn't be doing. At the same time, you should just do what you want to do, and then in holiness glorify God with it. I think that's also a very healthy mindset. It's you want to make a video, just make a video on your channel and glorify God. And if there's a million other videos out there, and those are all super successful, that's great. Be happy for their success, and just try to build your own and make that successful too, in holiness and glorify God with it. You'll get your reward from what you made, and they'll get whatever happens from them. It is going to be what it's going to be. Again, you can't control the circumstances and situations outside of yourself. And frankly, you probably can't even control your own self or your own circumstances. So yeah, again, maybe I'll make one. Maybe I'll make a walkthrough of it. And if that one goes well, maybe I'll make some more. And maybe I'll make some. I might make some more of these commentary videos either way. Because I do think this franchise is pretty cool. And also, I think at the end of the day, I can always put some kind of a Christian message in it, and I can just glorify God. And that's something I like doing. I think that's great for the channel too. It's great. It's great for the little community in the ministry, right? To glorify God. And honestly, regardless of whatever it is, right? Again, that's kind of what the channel would be a little more neutral. Frankly, kind of already is pretty neutral. I talk about positive stuff. I talk about negative stuff. I talk about stuff in the middle. It's pretty wide spectrum of different stuff. So yeah, Final Fantasy, it's a cool franchise. I'd like to maybe learn more about it. And, glorify God with your gaming. All right, thanks for watching. God is good.